Part 1. The day began like any other in the small town, quiet and slow, with people moving through the morning with little rush. The community center was busier than usual, though. There was excitement in the air, the kind that spreads through. Whispers and small smiles. A famous American musician was visiting the town for a day, offering a short workshop to young music lovers. His skill with the trumpet was known in many places, and for people who lived far from big cities, this felt like a once-in-a-lifetime moment. Inside the hall, students carried their instruments carefully, checking valves, wiping mouthpieces, and tuning notes that echoed softly in the room. They were dressed simply, but their faces showed the pride of young people who had practiced for a long time just to be here. Some had been waiting for days, talking to their friends about what they planned to ask him, what they hoped to learn, and how they wished to be noticed. The musician arrived with the kind of confidence that comes from experience. He greeted everyone warmly, and the crowd welcomed him with applause. He was friendly, charming, and carried himself like someone who had been on many stages. When he lifted his trumpet, even just to demonstrate a simple note, the room fell silent. With admiration, among the group stood a young woman who didn't try to stand out. She wore simple clothes and held a trumpet that looked older than the ones the other students carried. The silver coating had faded in some parts, and there were small dents that suggested years of use. She didn't speak loudly or push herself forward. Instead, she stayed near the side of the room, watching everything quietly. Her eyes followed every movement, every small gesture, as if she was trying to learn without drawing attention to herself. Some of the other students knew her. They had seen her around town, sometimes practicing near the river or sitting alone with her trumpet on the steps behind the community hall. They knew she could play, but they also knew she never performed when people were around. If someone walked by, she would stop immediately, almost as if she was startled. No one knew why she avoided attention, but they had learned not to ask. The musician walked around, giving small suggestions, adjusting someone's hand position, correcting posture, offering compliments when a student produced a clean note. His presence filled the room with energy. Everyone wanted to impress him. Everyone wanted to be noticed. After a while, he invited the students to take turns playing short pieces. Some played confidently, others nervously. He listened with patience, nodding thoughtfully, sometimes smiling, sometimes giving gentle advice. The room was filled with applause after each student finished. It was a warm, encouraging environment. Eventually, his eyes landed on the young woman standing in the back. She was holding her trumpet low, almost as if trying to hide it. But the musician had noticed her quiet presence from the moment he walked in. Maybe it was the worn instrument that caught his attention, or the way she watched everything with intense focus. He pointed toward her with a friendly smile. "You in the eye." "Back," he said in a light, teasing voice. "I haven't heard you play yet. How about you show us something?" The room reacted with small murmurs. A few students turned to look at her. Some of them smiled supportively, but others were simply curious. She froze for a moment. Her fingers tightened around her trumpet. She hadn't planned to play in front of anyone today. She had only come to listen, maybe to learn a thing or two from a great musician. She took a small breath and shook her head politely. "I'm okay," she said softly. "Please let others play." Her voice was barely loud enough for everyone to hear. The musician raised his eyebrows, surprised by her refusal. He wasn't offended, if anything. For many people, that would have been enough encouragement. But the young woman only grew more uncomfortable. She looked down, her shoulders slightly tense. It wasn't shyness in the ordinary sense. It was deeper, like someone protecting something fragile. The musician didn't seem to understand that. He stepped closer, still smiling. "Tell you what," he said, lifting his trumpet. How about a little fun? A short duel. Nothing serious. Just a few notes back and forth. I play something, you answer. The room filled with excited whispers. A duel with a famous musician. This was something people would talk about for months. The students near her looked at her with wide eyes. Some whispered encouragement, urging her to try. Others simply watched, curious about how she would respond. She felt her heart beating faster. A duel was the last thing she wanted. Not today. Maybe not ever. She had spent years avoiding attention, avoiding stages, avoiding pressure. The thought of playing even a simple tune in front of a room full of people made her chest tighten. But the musician continued speaking, still unaware of how his excitement affected her. "It'll be fun," he said again. "Let's give everyone a good show." His light-hearted tone made the room laugh gently. Not in a cruel way, but in a way that suggested they thought she was simply being too modest. The young woman looked. Around, every pair of eyes was on her. Some hopeful, some amused, some encouraging. She felt trapped between her fear and the expectation in the room. She took another breath, trying to soften the moment. "It's okay if she doesn't want to," the instructor said kindly. "She came to observe. That's also fine." But the musician had already stepped into the playful role of challenger. "Come on," he said with a grin. "I promise I won't make it too hard." His confidence filled the room with laughter again. It wasn't meant to pressure her, but it did. The sound of the laughter wrapped around her, not in a cruel way, but in a way that made her feel small, like everyone expected her to fail quietly. She looked at her old trumpet, its dents and faded shine reminding her of long ago days, when she used to play without fear. She remembered the person who once taught her, someone who had believed deeply in her talent, someone who encouraged her to play from the heart, not for approval. That memory stirred something inside her. She lifted her head slightly and looked at the musician. His eyes were bright and full of confident challenge. The room waited. Silence spread slowly, turning the moment into something larger than she expected. She swallowed once, then took a soft breath. Her voice came out steady, even though her hands trembled. "All right," she said quietly. "Just a short one." The room reacted instantly. Some students gasped softly. Others clapped or whispered excitedly. The musician smiled proudly, as if he had just convinced someone to join in a harmless game. The instructor watched her with thoughtful eyes, knowing there was more behind her decision than the room realized. She stepped forward slowly, her old trumpet in her hands. Every step felt heavier than the one before it. She wasn't sure why she had said yes. Maybe it was the pressure. Maybe it was the memory of her mentor. Maybe it was something she had been avoiding for too long. She reached the center of the room, standing across from the musician. He lifted his trumpet with an easy confidence, giving her an encouraging nod. "Ready?" he asked. She didn't trust her voice, so she simply nodded. The duel hadn't even begun. Yet the moment already felt like something that would change the course of the day, maybe even more than that. The room settled into complete silence. Waiting for the first note. The musician lifted his trumpet to his lips, preparing to play the opening line. And she stood there, heart racing, hands trembling slightly, about to face a moment she had spent years avoiding. No one in that room knew how everything was about to change. Part 2. When the young woman agreed to the duel, the room felt as if it had taken a breath it didn't know it was holding. People leaned forward a little more, shifting in their seats, whispering softly to the person next to them. No one expected her to say yes, and she herself didn't quite understand why she had. She stood there quietly, still holding her old trumpet, feeling every bit of weight inside it. The musician, still smiling from the excitement of the moment, lifted his trumpet and played a short, bright line. It was lively, full of energy, with quick changes that showed his skill. The notes filled the room easily, bouncing off the walls and drawing applause as soon as he stopped. He lowered his trumpet and looked at her. "Your turn," he said lightly. She lifted the instrument slowly. Her fingers rested on the keys with familiarity, but her hands were shaking lightly. She took a breath, but it didn't quite steady her nerves. She raised the trumpet to her lips, but before she could play, something held her back. Her breathing wasn't quite right. Her heart was too loud in her chest. She lowered the trumpet again. A few people in the room let out soft murmurs. Someone whispered that she must be too nervous. Someone else whispered that maybe she changed her mind. She heard every word, even though the voices were soft. The musician stepped a little closer. "Take your time," he said kindly. "No rush." But his kindness didn't ease the pressure she felt. If anything, the growing attention made it worse. Her mind drifted, uninvited, to memories that she usually kept buried deep. She remembered being much younger, sitting in a small room filled with the warmth of afternoon sunlight. She remembered the voice of her mentor, calm but firm, teaching her how to breathe correctly, how to listen to herself before playing a single note. Her mentor would tap gently on her shoulder and say, "Music comes from inside first. Don't force it. Let it rise." Those memories were gentle, but the ones that followed were not. She remembered the day she lost her mentor, the heavy silence. That took over her life afterward, the way she stopped playing in front of people because the sound only reminded her of what she no longer had. She remembered walking past the community stage many times, but never stepping onto it again. All of that was pressing against her now as she stood at the center of the room. With so many eyes on her dot, the instructor noticed her hesitation and stepped closer, speaking softly. "Just breathe," the instructor said. "No one is rushing you. You're here because you love music. Let that be enough." The young woman nodded slightly. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. Her hands steadied just a little. She lifted the trumpet again. This time, she didn't force herself to hurry. It didn't matter if the room waited a few more seconds. She pressed her lips gently to the mouthpiece, and finally, she played. Single note dot, it was soft. Not impressive or bold like the famous musician's note. Just a simple, gentle note that floated quietly into the room. But it was enough. Some of the students gasped softly, not because it was perfect, but because it carried something different. The musician's playing had been sharp and confident, filled with the kind of flash that comes from being on stage for years. But her note, it carried something warm, something honest. She lowered her trumpet, surprised by her own reaction. The note she played felt different inside her, like she had opened a door she thought was long shut. The musician looked at her with interest. "All right," he said, more softly now. "Let's try another." He played another line, this one, softer, smoother, giving her room to answer without pressure. It wasn't a challenge this time. It felt more like an invitation. She raised her trumpet again. She took another breath, this one a little steadier. She played a few notes in response, gentle and imperfect, but they carried a natural flow. The line she played wasn't flashy, but it had its own life. The room stayed quiet, listening carefully. The musician nodded in approval. "There you go," he said. "That's it." And just like that, something shifted inside her. The pressure in the room didn't disappear, but it softened. It was no longer a weight pressing down on her. It felt more like a space waiting to hear her voice. But even with that small success, her chest tightened again when she lowered the trumpet. Playing even a few notes in front of people was something she hadn't done for years, and she felt the old fear stirring again. The musician noticed her discomfort. He spoke gently this time, far from the playful tone he used earlier. "Do you want to continue?" he asked. "It's okay if you don't." She was surprised by the change in his tone. It didn't feel like a challenge anymore. It felt like he had finally understood that this moment meant something different for her. She hesitated, unsure. Her mind was racing with thoughts she couldn't organize. She didn't want to embarrass herself. She didn't want to step into anything too big. But at the same time, something inside her wanted to see where this could go. Before she could answer, one of the younger students near the front spoke quietly, "You're good. Please continue." Another student nodded. "Yeah, you sound nice," they said shyly. Their simple encouragement felt surprisingly strong. She looked around the room again. This time, the eyes watching her didn't feel harsh or demanding. They felt hopeful. She lifted her trumpet slowly, almost testing herself. Her breath flowed a little easier now. "Let's keep going," she said softly. The musician smiled, this time not with the confidence of showing off, but with respect. He played another line, gentle but challenging enough to keep her focus. She listened carefully, repeating the melody in her mind before answering. When she played again, her notes carried more confidence. They were clearer, smoother, still soft, but with a quiet strength underneath. The room listened even more closely, surprised by the change happening in her dot with each exchange of notes. She felt a little more of her old self returning, the girl who once practiced for hours, who smiled when her mentor praised her progress, who believed her music meant something. But the memory of losing her mentor still lingered. It wasn't something she could simply erase with a few notes. It was still there, sitting inside her like a shadow. The musician noticed a flicker of sadness in her expression when she finished the last line. He didn't say anything, but he understood. He had seen musicians with stories behind their music many times before. He just didn't expect to find such depth in a quiet young woman from a small town. The instructor watched her with pride. It had been a long time since anyone had seen her play in front of people. And now she was standing there, facing her fear note by note. The duel came to a pause. Not because anyone ended it, but because the moment felt complete for now. She lowered her trumpet, breathing softly, feeling a mixture of relief, fear, and something like hope. The musician stepped forward. His voice was soft and respectful when he spoke. "You have something special," he said. Not many people play with feeling like that. She looked at him in surprise, unused to such praise. She didn't know how to respond, so she lowered her eyes and simply nodded. The room remained quiet, sensing the importance of the moment. No one made jokes. No one laughed. They simply watched her, feeling a kind of connection to her story, even though they didn't know the details. The musician took a small step back, giving her space. "We'll come back to the duel," he said with a gentle tone. "But for now, thank you for playing." She nodded again. Her hands were still trembling, but her heart felt different, lighter in some places, heavier in others. She returned to her spot, the same place where she had started the day. Nothing around her had changed. The walls were the same. The people were the same. The old trumpet in her hands was the same, but inside her, something small had shifted. A door she once closed had opened a little, and even though she didn't fully understand what that meant, she knew one thing for certain. This moment wasn't over. It had only begun. She just didn't know that everything was about to grow much larger than she expected, and that her past, her fear, her talent, and her future were all waiting quietly for what would happen next. Part 3. The room slowly returned to movement after the soft pause that settled over everyone. People shifted in their seats again, but more quietly now, as if they were afraid to break the feeling that had filled the space. The young woman stood in her corner, holding her old trumpet carefully, still recovering from the emotional weight of what she had just done. Even though she had played only a few lines, It felt like she had climbed a mountain she wasn't prepared for. The musician watched her from across the room. His expression had changed. The playful smile was gone. In its place was something more thoughtful, as if he had suddenly realized that she wasn't just a shy beginner. They had all witnessed something deeper. He cleared his throat gently and addressed the room. "All right," he said softly. "Let's continue with something new for everyone." He didn't mention the duel again, not yet. Instead, he began to explain a technique for controlling breath and tone. The students listened, but some of them kept glancing toward the young woman. She stayed quiet, her trumpet resting against her leg. She didn't know if she felt relieved or exposed. It was strange she had only played a few lines, but it had stirred something inside her she wasn't ready to face. The instructor approached her gently, speaking in a quiet voice so only she could hear. "You did well," the instructor said. "Really well." She nodded without looking up. Compliments always made her uneasy. It wasn't that she didn't appreciate them. She just didn't know how to accept them without feeling like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't. Still, hearing those words felt nice. Soft, but nice. The workshop continued. The musician invited the students to form small groups to practice short exercises. Some of them gathered eagerly, pairing off and comparing notes immediately. But a few stood awkwardly, not sure where to go. The young woman stayed where she was, thinking she would practice alone. She was used to it. She had spent years playing by herself, far away from eyes and expectations. But before she could quietly slip away to an empty corner, two students approached her. One was a soft-spoken boy with a trumpet almost as old as hers. The other was a girl with curious eyes, someone who seemed fascinated by everything. "Do you want to join us?" the girl asked with a shy smile. She hesitated, surprised by the invitation. She had never been the first choice for group practice. Most people assumed she preferred to be left alone, and sometimes she did. But today felt different. "Sure," she said quietly. They practiced together, taking turns playing simple lines. The boy missed a few notes and laughed at himself. The girl had trouble with her breathing and kept stopping to try again. They weren't perfect, but they were trying, learning, and encouraging each other. It felt good to be in a small group like that, without pressure or judgment. She found herself relaxing a little more with each minute. At one point, the girl looked at her with admiration. "You play really nice," she said. The young woman shook her head quickly, embarrassed. "I just got lucky earlier," she said. "No," the girl insisted gently. "It wasn't luck." The boy nodded. "Yeah, you sound like the music is saying something." The young woman looked down at the trumpet in her hands. She didn't know how to respond to that, but the words stayed with her, warming a part of her that had grown cold over the years. Meanwhile, the musician kept walking around the room, listening to the groups, giving little pieces of advice here and there. But he kept glancing toward the young woman, as if he was studying her from afar. When he finally approached their group, the girl and boy straightened up nervously. "How's it going here?" he asked kindly. The boy answered first. "We're trying, sir." The musician smiled and nodded. "I can hear that," he said. Then he looked at the young woman. "And how about you? Feeling a bit more comfortable?" "A little," she replied softly. "Good," he said. "You have a natural touch. Don't hide it." She felt her cheeks warm again, unsure of what to say. The musician didn't push her for a response. Instead, he demonstrated a short technique, guiding the three of them through a breathing exercise. They repeated it several times until it felt easier. As he stood up to walk to another group, he paused and turned back to her. "We're not done with our little duel," he said with a small smile, "but only when you're ready." She nodded. her pulse quickening. She didn't know if she was relieved or terrified. The workshop continued for another hour. Students went through several exercises, some struggling, some improving, all of them enjoying the rare moment of having a famous musician teach them. The room gradually filled with laughter, small mistakes, and bursts of confidence. But the young woman moved through it all with a strange mix of calm and uncertainty. She was doing well. She was blending in. She wasn't hiding as much as before. But deep inside, something heavy still tugged at her. Finally, the musician clapped his hands together, calling everyone back to attention. "Let's gather around," he said. "I want to show you something before we finish for the day." The students formed a large semicircle around him. He stood in the center, lifting his trumpet slightly. "I'm going to play a short piece for you," he said. "Not to show off. Just to remind you why the trumpet is such a beautiful instrument." The students looked eager. Even the instructor watched with anticipation. The musician began to play. The room filled with a smooth, controlled sound that felt effortless. His tone was rich, each note flowing into the next. The melody was simple, but he played it with a sense of confidence and grace that made it feel bigger. The young woman listened carefully. She recognized the technique, the breathing, the emotion behind the sound. The music wrapped around her, like a memory, stirring something familiar. When he finished, the room applauded warmly. He lowered his trumpet and gave them a thoughtful smile. "Now," he said, "I want to try something else." He turned to the young woman. Her breath caught. "Would you join me here?" he asked. The room fell silent again. She froze. Even after she had played earlier, she didn't feel ready for this. Playing a few soft notes was one thing. Standing in the center of the room with him was something entirely different. Her heart beat hard in her chest, the way it did years ago when she faced her first stage and felt the world staring back at her. The musician noticed her hesitation. "Only if you want to," he said gently. The instructor gave her a small nod of encouragement. She took a slow breath. She didn't feel ready. She didn't feel brave. But she also didn't want to spend the rest of her life running from the thing she once loved. She stepped forward. Each step felt heavier than the last. But she walked until she was standing beside him in the center of the room. He leaned in slightly and whispered, "Just follow my lead. Nothing complicated." She nodded. He placed his trumpet to his lips again, playing a slow, inviting line. It was calm, gentle, with plenty of space between the notes. She listened. Then she lifted her trumpet and played a soft response. Their sounds blended naturally, as if they had practiced together before. The musician played another line, this one slightly more emotional. She answered with a melody that felt like it, came straight from her heart. The room was silent, watching closely. No one whispered. No one moved. They all felt something happening, something quiet but powerful. As she played, she remembered the small room with afternoon sunlight, the patient voice of her mentor, the first time she learned to breathe with her music instead of fighting it. For a moment, she felt like that girl again. When the last note faded, the room burst into soft applause, not loud or wild, but full of warmth. She lowered her trumpet, her hands trembling with a mix of relief and emotion. The musician gave her a gentle nod, filled with respect. "You see?" he said softly. "It's still there." She looked at him with wide eyes. "What is?" "Your heart," he replied. "You play from a place most people never find." Her throat tightened. The instructor looked at her with proud eyes, knowing how far she had come in such a short amount of time. The students began to gather their things, still talking about what they had just witnessed. Some of them watched the young woman with new admiration. Some whispered about how beautifully she played, but she hardly heard them. Her mind was full of memories, some painful, some warm in the feeling of music slowly returning to a part of her she thought was gone forever. As the workshop came to an end, the musician approached her once more. "We're continuing this tomorrow," he said gently, "if you're willing." She hesitated, unsure of what tomorrow would bring, but she nodded anyway, because something inside her had begun to wake up, and she didn't want to close that door again. Part 4 will be written here. He stood backstage longer than he planned, unsure if he should enter the room where everyone waited. For a moment, he simply listened to the voices drifting from the hall. Some people sounded excited, already talking about what might happen when the two musicians played together again. Others seemed confused, trying to understand how all of it had begun. And somewhere in the middle of that mixture of noise, he heard her soft laugh. It wasn't loud or sharp. It was gentle, almost shy, but it carried a kind of calm confidence he hadn't noticed before. She wasn't the same quiet girl he had met earlier. Something had shifted, and he knew the shift wasn't small. He took a slow breath before stepping out. The hall wasn't packed the way it would be during a real show, but there were enough people to feel the pressure. Musicians from the festival sat in small groups, talking among themselves. Some people from the audience earlier had stayed behind too, curious about what they had just witnessed. And right in the middle of them, she sat with her hands resting on her lap, her trumpet case leaning against the chair. She looked calm, almost too calm. He walked toward her, and people noticed him immediately. The conversation softened. A few heads turned. Some smiled, some whispered. He didn't mind any of it. His eyes were fixed on her. She looked up at him. For a second, there was nothing but quiet understanding between them. He didn't try to hide the respect on his face this time. "Ready to talk?" he asked. She nodded once. They stepped out through a side door that led to a smaller courtyard behind the building. The evening air was cool and soft. A faint wind carried the smell of flowers from a nearby garden. It seemed like the perfect place to talk in peace, away from the curious eyes inside. She stood a few feet from him, hugging her arms lightly, not out of fear, but out of thought. He noticed she was replaying something in her head. Maybe the music, maybe the crowd, maybe the moment when she surprised everyone. He broke the silence first. "You played with heart," he said simply. She didn't smile. She didn't look proud. Instead, she took a slow breath and whispered, "I just played how I felt." He nodded. "You felt a lot." There was a small pause. Then she asked the question he knew was coming. "Why did you challenge me?" Her tone wasn't angry. It wasn't accusing. It was honest. He rubbed the back of his neck, trying to choose the right words. "Because I wanted to see what you had, and maybe because I thought I had nothing to lose." He looked at her carefully. "Turns out I was wrong on one of those things." "Hey." Soft laugh escaped her, not mocking, only understanding. She looked at the courtyard stone path for a moment before lifting her eyes again. "I didn't expect this," she said. "I came here to listen, not to stand in front of people and play with someone like you." He raised an eyebrow. "Someone like me?" She didn't seem flustered. "Someone everyone knows. Someone who makes it look easy. Someone the room already respects before he even lifts a trumpet." He didn't interrupt. "And I didn't think you'd even look at me." His chest tightened. "I'm looking now." She nodded slowly. "Yes, now you are." Another moment passed. She looked up at him, and her eyes were steady. "You made me nervous." But the music didn't. She shrugged gently. "When the music started, I forgot who is standing next to me. I just wanted to feel something real." Her voice softened. "I didn't expect the crowd to react the way they did." He leaned against the stone wall. "You didn't hear what they said afterward?" Her head tilted slightly. What did they say? That. They haven't seen me pushed that hard in years. She blinked. Slowly, then she whispered, I wasn't trying to push you. He gave a half smile. That's what makes it even more impressive. There was silence again, but not the uncomfortable kind. It was a pause filled with things neither of them had said yet. Finally, she sat down on the stone bench near the wall. He joined her a moment later, leaving a respectful distance. She looked up at the sky. This whole thing, she said, it's strange. He chuckled softly. Strange is one word. I mean, I've played for years, but mostly alone, or with small groups. Nothing like this. Nothing that felt so big. She pressed her fingers lightly against the trumpet case beside her. And now, I don't know what any of this means. He watched her closely. There was something different about her now. Not confidence, exactly. Something deeper, like she had discovered a part of herself she wasn't ready to admit existed. It means, he said gently, that you belong there, on that stage? She looked at him with quiet disbelief. Do you really think that? He nodded. I know it. She stared at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could trust the certainty in his voice. Then she whispered, almost too soft to hear, I'm not used to people saying that about me. He leaned forward slightly. Then it's time someone did. A breeze passed between them. Neither spoke for a while. She seemed lost in thought, and he didn't want to interrupt whatever was happening inside her. Finally, she looked at him again. Why did you take it so seriously? When I played next to you, you could have just gone easy and made the crowd happy. He laughed without humor. I don't play easy. Not even for myself. She tilted her head, studying him. That sounds lonely. He wasn't expecting that. He didn't reply right away. Instead, he sighed slowly. Maybe it is. She didn't push further. She just listened, and for some reason, that made him want to say more. I've spent so long trying to stay at the top, he said quietly, trying not to slip, trying not to disappoint people who expect the best from me. It's exhausting sometimes. He met her eyes. And then you show up. You don't try to beat me. You don't try to impress anyone. You just play because you love it. Her voice was soft. Isn't that how it's supposed to be? He smiled a little, but there was sadness in it. It should be. She leaned forward, elbows on her knees, thoughtful. Maybe you just forgot for a while. He nodded slowly. Maybe I did. Another long silence. He finally asked the question that had been forming in his mind since the moment she finished playing. Would you play with me again? Her eyes widened slightly. Again? Yes. Not as a challenge, as a duet. Side by side? She looked uncertain. I don't know if I can do that. Why not? She hesitated. Because I'm still learning. So am I, he said. She laughed softly. You? Learning? He nodded, especially now. Her face soft in a way he hadn't seen before. You really want me to? I do. She looked down at her hands. She wasn't afraid. She wasn't overwhelmed. She was thinking. After a long moment, she whispered, If I say yes, people might think I don't deserve it. He shook his head. Let them think whatever they want. You earned it. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she slowly opened her trumpet case and touched the instrument gently, like she was grounding herself. Finally, she whispered, Okay. His heart loosened in relief that she continued softly. But I don't want a crowd next time. I want to play somewhere small, somewhere quiet. He nodded instantly. Wherever you want. She looked at him carefully. You're serious? Completely. She closed the trumpet case again and stood. He stood too. For a moment, they just looked at each other in the soft evening light. Something unspoken passed between them, respect, curiosity. A shifting connection neither of them had planned. Then she said quietly, "Tomorrow?" He nodded. "Tomorrow." She gave the smallest smile before walking back toward the hall. He watched her until she disappeared behind the door. He wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Everything had already begun to change. Part 5 will be written here. He arrived at the small rehearsal room earlier than he expected. The place was quiet, tucked away at the far end of the building, where no one usually went unless they needed privacy. The hallway outside was empty, and only the soft hum of the old ceiling fan filled the silence. He liked it that way. It gave him time to think. He set his trumpet case down on a chair and took a moment to breathe. All night he had barely slept. He kept replaying the way she played, the way the crowd reacted, the way she said yes to playing again. Something about it all felt important, more important than anything he had done recently. He didn't know why, but the thought of playing with her again made him feel something he hadn't felt in years. Excitement. Real excitement. A few minutes passed before the door opened. She stepped inside quietly, holding her trumpet case in both hands. She looked almost the same as yesterday's simple clothes. Calm expression, but something in her eyes told him she had also been thinking a lot. "Good morning," she said softly. He gave a small smile. "Morning." She looked around the room, taking in the worn-out chairs and the old piano pushed into the corner. It wasn't special, not compared to the big stage from yesterday. But maybe that was the point. "This place feels peaceful," she said. "That's why I picked it," he replied. She placed her case on a chair and opened it slowly. He noticed her movements were careful, almost thoughtful, like she was preparing for something meaningful. He watched her quietly until she looked up at him. "Nervous?" he asked. She shrugged. "Maybe, but not like yesterday. This feels different." "Good different?" he asked. "I think so." He nodded. They warmed up without speaking. The sounds of the two trumpets filled the small room, bouncing gently off the walls. Her tone was warm and steady. His tone was strong, confident. Together, they blended in a way that made him pause for a moment. She didn't notice. She was focused, eyes half closed as she worked through her warm-up notes. After a few minutes, he lowered his trumpet. "Want to start with something simple?" She nodded. "I like simple." He chose a soft melody he used to play when he needed to calm his mind. It wasn't complicated. It wasn't flashy. It was just warm, slow, and honest. She listened to the first few bars before joining in. When she did, the room changed. Her sound wasn't loud, but it carried a feeling that wrapped around his own playing effortlessly. They weren't fighting for space. They weren't forcing anything. They were simply fitting together. For the first time in a long time, he felt truly connected to the music. They played until the last note faded. She lowered her trumpet and looked at him with wide eyes. "I've never played that with anyone before." He smiled gently. "I've never played it like that before." She looked thoughtful, as if trying to understand what just happened. He spoke again. "Want to try something a little more upbeat?" She nodded quickly. "Yes." They began another piece, still simple, still gentle, but faster this time. Their notes moved around each other, like they had played together for years. She followed his rhythm easily, but she also added small touches of her own little moments, a feeling that made the music feel alive. He noticed every one of them. After an hour, they paused to take a break. She set her trumpet down and sat on the edge of a chair, sipping water. He watched her for a moment before sitting across from her. "You play like you mean every note," he said. She looked down shyly. "I don't know how to play any other way." "That's a gift," he said. She shook her head gently. "I just play what I feel." He leaned forward slightly. That's exactly what makes it special. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and he felt something shift. In the room, not romantic, not dramatic, just human. Like two people finally understanding each other. After a moment, she whispered, "Can I ask you something?" "Anything," he replied. "Why does it matter so much to you? Playing with me?" He took a slow breath. "It matters. Because I've been playing for years, and somewhere along the way, I started worrying more about being perfect than being real." He looked at the floor for a second before meeting her eyes again. "Yesterday, when you played next to me, I felt something real. I didn't expect it. I didn't even know I needed it." She didn't speak. He continued, "I want to play with someone who makes me feel the music again. And that someone is you." Her lips parted slightly, as if she didn't know what to say. Then she whispered, "I never thought I would hear something like that in my life." "You deserve to," he said softly. She looked away for a moment, like she needed time to steady herself. They began playing again soon after. This time they chose something more lively, something that made both of them smile without even realizing it. They moved through the melody with ease. At one point, he stepped closer to harmonize more directly. She didn't step back. She just adjusted her tone and matched him perfectly. When they stopped, both were breathless from the energy. She laughed quietly. "That felt good." "It did," he agreed. There was a warmth in the room now, something gentle and calm. But then something unexpected happened. A knock came at the door. He froze first. She froze a moment later. The door opened slowly, and a middle-aged man entered. He was part of the festival staff. He looked surprised to see them playing together. "Sorry to interrupt," the man said, "but the director wants to see both of you." Both of them looked at each other. She looked nervous. "Why?" "The staff member said." "He didn't say. Just asked for you to come right away." Then he left. She turned to him, eyes unsure. "Is something wrong?" He shook his head slowly. "I don't think so. But let's go see." She took a deep breath and picked up her trumpet case. They walked side by side down the long hallway. She kept glancing at him, as if she was trying to read something on his face. He offered a small smile. "Don't worry. Whatever it is, we'll handle it." She nodded slowly. When they reached the director's office, he knocked lightly. "Come in." A voice answered. They stepped inside. The director sat behind the desk, reading a piece of paper. He looked up at them with a serious expression, not angry, not upset, just focused. "Sit," he said. They did. The director placed the paper down. "I heard what happened yesterday," he began. "And I heard what's been happening this morning." Neither of them spoke. The director leaned forward. "I want something from you, both of you." She swallowed. "What is it?" He folded his hands. "I want you two to perform together at the closing ceremony of the festival." She gasped softly. He blinked in surprise. "That's the main event?" "Yes," the director said. "And after what I heard about yesterday, and what I heard just now from one of the staff passing by your rehearsal room, I believe you two could give the festival something unforgettable." She stared at the floor, overwhelmed. The director continued, "You don't have to decide right now, but the event is in 3 days. If you agree, you will be the final performance. No pressure, of course, just thousands of people watching." She looked like the air had left her lungs. He looked at her carefully. "You okay?" She shook her head slightly, but whispered, "I don't know." The director gave a gentle smile. "Take your time. But I hope you'll say yes." He nodded. "We'll talk about it." They left the office slowly. Once they were outside, she leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. "This is too much," she whispered. He stood close, not touching her, but near enough to make her feel grounded. You don't have to say yes, he said softly. Not if it scares you. She opened her eyes. I'm not scared of playing. What then? He asked. Her voice trembled slightly. I'm scared of not being good enough for something that big. He shook his head. You're already more than good enough. She didn't speak. He continued gently. But whatever you choose, I'm with you. She looked at him for a long time, a very long time, and then she whispered, Let me think. He nodded. Take all the time you need. But deep down, he hoped she would say yes, not for the crowd, not for the festival, but because the thought of playing next to her on that stage felt like something he had been waiting for, something he hadn't even known he wanted until now. And as she walked away slowly, he realized something. Her answer might change everything again. Part 6 will be written here. He didn't see her for the rest of the day. After she walked away, she disappeared into one of the back halls of the building, leaving him alone with his thoughts. He didn't chase her. He knew she needed time, and he respected that. But even as he tried to stay calm, a small knot of worry formed in his stomach. By evening, the festival grounds were almost empty. Most of the musicians had left for the night, and the staff were busy packing equipment or locking rooms. The quiet felt heavier than usual. He found himself walking along the path that led to the garden behind the building. The sky was a deep blue, and the first few stars had already appeared. He took a long breath, letting the cool air settle his thoughts. He wondered what she was thinking. Was she scared? Confused? Still deciding? Or had she already made up her mind? He didn't know, but he hoped more than he wanted to admit that she wouldn't walk away from this moment. He stayed in the garden for almost half an hour before heading back inside. As he approached the entrance, he stopped. She was sitting on the steps. Her trumpet case was beside her, closed. She had her hands clasped together, her shoulders slightly hunched, and her eyes fixed on the ground. When she heard his footsteps, she looked up slowly. For a moment, neither of them said anything. She stood and brushed her hands together nervously. I've been waiting for you, she said softly. He nodded. I'm here. She looked down at her feet. I've been thinking all day. Her voice was gentle but steady. About the offer. About playing in front of that many people. About everything that's happened. She paused, searching for the right words. And I realized something. He waited. She lifted her eyes, and in them he saw something he hadn't expected. Strength. I want to do it, she said. I want to play at the closing ceremony. With you. His breath left him in a quiet exhale. She continued, I'm scared. I won't pretend I'm not. But if I don't do this now, I'll regret it forever. And I don't want to live wondering what might have happened if I had said yes. He took a slow step closer. Thank you for trusting me. She gave a small smile. Thank you for believing in me. For the first time since the challenge began, they felt like equals, not a famous musician and an unknown young woman, not a master and a student, not a competitor and a surprise Dot, just two people who loved the same thing. They rehearsed the next morning, and the morning after that. Hours passed, each day, but neither complained. The more they played together, the more their sounds blended into something that felt whole. When one of them made a mistake, the other laughed it off. When one of them nailed a difficult part, the other celebrated quietly. There was no pressure, no fear, no competition, not only music. On the second day of practice, he noticed something new. She wasn't just following him anymore. She was leading, sometimes offering her own ideas, suggesting changes, experimenting with melodies. She was finding her voice, not just as a musician, but as someone who finally believed she belonged. He admired her more with every passing hour, but he also saw how tired she was, not physically, emotionally. This was all new to her, and caring. So much feeling in such a short time wasn't easy. At one point, she sat on the floor, legs stretched out, trumpet across her lap. "Do you ever feel like you're growing too fast?" she asked quietly. He sat beside her, all the time. She smiled. "Good, then maybe I'm normal. More than normal," he said softly. "You're becoming something special." She looked at him with a gentle kind of disbelief, but she didn't argue. The night before the final performance arrived sooner than either expected. They finished their last rehearsal and walked outside together. The path was lit by small lights, glowing softly in. The night, she walked slowly, her hands in her pockets. He matched her pace. "Are you ready for tomorrow?" he asked. She took a breath. "I think I'm ready to try." "That's enough," he said. She nodded. They stopped near the fountain in the garden. The water moved quietly, catching bits of moonlight. She turned to him. "Can I tell you something?" "Of course." "I used to think that people like you didn't struggle, that everything came easy, that you never doubted yourself." She picked at a thread on her sleeve. "But watching you these last few days, I realized you're human, just like me." He gave a small laugh. "Very human, more than you know." She smiled for real then, soft and sincere. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for treating me like I matter." "You do matter," he replied. "Not because of the performance, not because of the crowd, but because you found something inside yourself you didn't know was there, and you shared it with me." She looked down, touched deeply. "Let's rest," he said gently. "Tomorrow is big, but we'll do it together." She nodded and walked toward her room. He stayed at the fountain a moment longer, letting the calm wash over him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he knew it would be unforgettable. The next morning, the festival grounds were alive with noise. People rushed to set up equipment, adjust lighting, test microphones, coordinate schedules. The closing ceremony was the biggest part of the event, and everything had to go perfectly. She arrived early, her trumpet case clutched tightly in her hand. When she spotted him across the stage, her shoulders relaxed a little. He walked over to her. "Ready?" She nodded. "Yes." But he could see the nerves in her eyes. He lowered his voice. "Just look at me when you play. Forget the crowd. Forget everything. Just follow the music." She nodded again, more confidently. As the evening ceremony began, the stage lights brightened. Performers came and went. The crowd grew louder, bigger. She stood backstage, gripping her trumpet, taking slow breaths. He stepped beside her. "We're next." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Okay," her voice trembled, but not from fear, from emotion. The announcer called their names. The crowd erupted in applause. They stepped onto the stage. The lights blinded her for a second, and her heart pounded hard in her chest. But then she heard a soft whisper behind her. "I'm right here." She looked at him. He nodded. They lifted their trumpets. The first note floated into the air. Then another. And slowly, the crowd fell silent. Their melody wrapped around the entire hall, gentle, warm, rising and falling, like a story being told without words. She played with everything inside her. Not fear, not pressure. Feeling. Halfway through, he stepped slightly closer, guiding her gently through a difficult part. She followed perfectly. And when her moment came, the small solo they had worked on so carefully, she didn't hold back. Her sound filled the room. Soft, strong, honest, human. When the last note faded, the silence lasted one long, breathtaking second. Then the applause hit them like a wave. She froze. He smiled. The crowd stood. People cheered. Some even wiped their eyes. She looked out at the sea of faces. stunned Dot, and she looked at him. He whispered, "You did it." She whispered back, "We did it." When they walked off stage, her hands were shaking not from fear, but from something bright and powerful. She hadn't felt this strongly before Dot Pride, Dot the director, found them backstage. "That," he said with a wide smile, "was extraordinary." She blushed and looked down. He placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Don't hide from this. You earned every second of that applause." She nodded quietly. After the crowd left and the hall emptied, she and he walked outside one last time. The night was cool. The air felt fresh. She turned to him. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head. "No, thank you. You reminded me why I started playing in the first place." She looked at him with soft eyes. "What happens now?" He smiled. "Whatever you want. More duets, more music, more moments. Like this, if you choose." She thought for a moment before nodding slowly. "I think I want to keep playing. With you." He felt a warmth spread through him. She continued, "Not because of the stage, not because of the crowd, because when we play, I feel like I'm becoming the person I was always meant to be." He nodded, touched. "Then this is just the beginning." She smiled gently, and together, with the festival lights fading behind them, they walked into a future none of them could have imagined on the day he first challenged her. A future shaped not by pride or rivalry or fear, but by two people who found something rare, something honest, something life-changing in the sound of their own music.